Gav, I believe these two are known to you.
What are you doing here?
Where are we?
They must have followed you into the edit suite. This ridiculous podcast. I knew something like this would happen if we stayed in one place too long.
Is this really where you edit, Gav?
Yes.
And what's wrong with it?
But it was just a conversation.
Perhaps.
But it was an ordinary video call. We talked all around the subject. Paul, you heard me.
Oh, you wouldn't understand.
But I want to understand.
It's an illusion, it must be.
Illusion indeed. You say we can't create an enormous sound file from one of our smaller conversations?
No.
But you've discovered software, haven't you?
Yes?
Well, software delights in taking something very small and making it unbelievably huge.
Well, yes, but I still don't know.
Not quite clear, is it? I can see by your faces that you're not certain. You don't understand, and I knew you wouldn't. Never mind. The point is not whether you understand. What's going to happen to you, They'll tell everybody about Audacity now.
Audacity?
The editing software. They chose the name Audacity because regardless of what you ask it to do, it does whatever it wants.
Just let me get this straight. A thing that looks like a bunch of wiggly lines on a screen. It can move anywhere in our conversation.
Yes.
Quite so.
But that's ridiculous.
Have you ever thought what it's like to be wanderers in the fourth dimension? Have you? To be exiles? While we edit, Gav and I are cut off from our own lives without friends or family. But one day, we shall get back. Yes, one day, when the edit is done.
It's true, every word of it's true. You don't know what you've done coming in here. Run away while you still have the chance.
Hello, and welcome to the podcast where we take something old, a Doctor Who story from the original series, compare it with something new, one from the new series, and add something borrowed, that sketch, to make Something Who. Yes, it's Something Who podcast, episode 51. I'm Richard, and we're back to discuss another couple of Doctor Who stories. First off, it's the very first story of all, An Unearthly Child, or whatever it is you choose to call it. And then it's that other one that sort of comes right between the two, the old and the new series. It's the so-called TV movie starring the Eighth Doctor. We're going to talk about New Beginnings, I guess, over the course of the evening. And with me to discuss such things, we have Big Finish author and missing we have Big Finish author and missing episodes podcaster Paul.
Hello.
Oh, it was seamless, that, wasn't it? Utterly seamless. We've got science and astronomy writer Giles.
Evening.
And we have graphic designer and podcaster Gav.
Hello.
Good evening, chaps.
Good evening.
So what's happened since the last time we were together? That there Doctor Who's back on the telly.
It is, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to Doctor Who again these days.
Yes, I see this. This is being repeated across my timeline on Facebook. People I'm told are assured are real are telling me that they like Doctor Who again after having their doubts of recent years.
Really?
I even liked most of episode 3, which is not a popular take in the last few days.
Yeah, well, it appealed to me, actually. My trajectory was episode 1, no idea. Episode 2, bit dull. Episode 3, really quite liked.
Ah.
Yeah.
My girlfriend absolutely hated it, and I spent 20 minutes explaining it to her. But, yeah, it was a bold move, telling several backstories all with the wrong actors, and some might say it was a bit of a misstep, but if you were able to keep up, the actual content was very intriguing, and I'm fully invested in the mystery of the division. You know, the pre-Hartnell Doctor controversy rumbles on in the background, but I actually have absolutely no problem with the Timeless Child backstory. I don't think it's any better or worse than the War Doctor. I still remember being viscerally disappointed watching episode 10 of the War Games and getting the explanation, and the Doctor just says, "I was bored." And I just remember thinking when I was younger, yeah, but, you know, what's the real story going to be? And there wasn't one, not in the War Games anyway. I mean, they've made up 6 replacements since then.
Well, it was only going to be Looms, wasn't it, if it wasn't this?
What, in the War Games? Yeah.
Yeah, it's been kind of up and down for me. First episode, I didn't know quite what to make of it. Second episode, I quite enjoyed. Third episode, I thought, not so sure that this is... Yeah, it reminded me, the third one kind of reminded me of one of those, I say one of those Red Dwarf episodes, like every other Red Dwarf episode where they basically get the cast to be an alternative version of themselves.
Oh, yes.
Someone on Twitter made the very cynical observation that this series was made under COVID lockdown restrictions, and what better way to do it than to minimise your cast as much as possible. But I'm sure it was a creative decision.
Well, win-win if it was both, I suppose.
I quite like minimal casts, and I may be returning to that theme during the course of this podcast. I think the series so far has been more entertaining than it has been of late, and less egregious. But I wouldn't necessarily say it was good. But I would say it was more entertaining and less annoying.
Yeah.
I did remember thinking 20 minutes into the episode that's just been on, there's a line that Russell T Davies wrote in The Writer's Tale, which is something like, it's better for the audience to be confused for 5 minutes than bored for 30 seconds. And I thought, that's true, but I'm not sure whether that expands ad infinitum to a 40-minute episode. But I was intrigued and invested and confused. The bit that was designed to be convoluted didn't bother me. There were plot strands and the execution of certain things which I had more issues with. Using the past to save the future, and the Doctor just turns up in the chamber and says to the priestesses or whatever they are, "Oh, well done, you've done it." And you think, well, done what? And then the villains come around the corner and they haven't been defeated. And I thought at that point, okay, I don't fully understand what's supposed to have just happened there.
That was a bit weird, wasn't it?
It felt like something had disappeared in the edit or in the redraft.
But the good news is that next week, or this coming week, it's going to be, or maybe last week by the time I've edited it, is going to be Maxine Alderton, who we quite enjoyed last time when it was Haunting of Villa Diodati. So
we promise she's written circa 50% of the episodes. So,
well, there we go.
What thrills! And maybe Captain Jack will show up as well. Who knows what could happen?
You don't subscribe to the theory that Vinda was meant to be John Barrowman? I
do. That's why I said it.
I see. That's confusing then.
It was a joke for myself.
Okay.
My favourite kind. I've now reached such a pitch in my art that I've given up on making sense to anybody else. As long as I have my fun.
If that theory is true, does the episode that we've just had make much sense about his...
No.
I haven't seen it.
Okay.
Right. Well, then, no, it doesn't, because it's about the backstory of the woman he loves going out to look for him and how he got posted on the outpost because he did his job, basically.
Yeah. With one of the most clunking lines of exposition we've had in a long time.
Yes.
In there, yeah.
Yes. It's not the most skillfully crafted script, but there you go.
No, I don't know. I think the Captain Jack conspiracy theory, doesn't that kind of fall apart because they started filming this didn't they start filming last autumn? Or am I imagining?
I'm not wedded to it at all. I was a bit confused by the dates. I thought that... Is that what you're saying? They'd filmed it all before, or at least filmed most of it before?
Not all of it, but I think they would have committed to...
That's what I thought.
To Vinda being cast before we got that far.
Very good. Well, anyway, so there's our lukewarm take on the new series, and you never know, we might have a marginally colder one next time.
Yes.
So on then perhaps to An Unearthly Child, or Serial A, or The Tribe of Gum, or that one with the cave people in it.
100,000 BC.
Yeah, yes, whatever you choose to call it. Written by Anthony Coburn, directed, of course, by Waris Hussain. And I also watched the pilot episode, just for a bit of a laugh. And I have just listened, a few months ago to Toby Haydock discussing in tremendous detail all the many and various differences between the pilot episode and the one that was transmitted. But to be honest, in the moment of watching it, It seemed like two versions of more or less the same thing. I mean, there are differences in the dialogue, but it didn't seem so different. I suppose just as a slight variation on a theme, I'm not old enough that I was alive when it went out the first time, and I did watch it in 1981 when the Five Faces season came along. But actually, for episodes 2, 3, and 4, that was the first time I watched it since the Five Faces
Hooray.
season. So
wouldn't be the same without.
You have a will of iron. How have you managed to resist for so long? Have you only seen the first episode again because it's been repeated on its own in various places?
No, well, I think the truth is that if you do the sums, I was about 14 when I saw it, and I think being about 14 when you see it is enough to convince you that episodes 2, 3, and 4 are a bit rubbish, but episode 1's quite fun. So I think I went back and watched episode 1 a few times because I thought it was quite fun. This time I discovered that my 14-year-old self was an idiot, and that episodes 2, 3, and 4 are quite fun as well.
Aha.
So there we go. We'll come to that later, I'm sure.
Do you remember the pilot episode was screened in 93 on BBC Two? And it was trumpeted as never before seen episode of Doctor Who. And although I was a fan, I basically didn't understand the difference between the pilot and the first episode of the broadcast version. So I was absolutely baffled by this big announcement and was thoroughly confused by watching it, thinking, I've seen this before. Why is everyone going on about this? Isn't a missing episode. I'm sure I've got this is on my video collection. What's all this? So yeah, I was totally baffled by that. As you say, I mean, they're not tremendously different pieces of television. They are different in the detail and different in the subtleties of the performance. But if you just have a fairly vague memory of the outline of the episode, I mean, it's essentially the same piece of television.
Same stuff happens, yeah.
Yeah. So that was a revelation to discover later the significance of it, and then compare and contrast, and that becomes interesting. But yes, at the time in '93, I was very confused.
For those of you who watched them both as research for this episode, if you had to pick one major difference, what would you pick?
Susan.
Right.
She's a bit weirder in the pilot. I mean, she's pretty weird in the actual one as well. She's certainly weirder than she's ever going to be again. But she's particularly weird, I think, in the pilot.
No freaky dancing.
Hartnell's much gentler and
Yeah.
more amusing in the broadcast version.
Anything I really ever remember from the behind the scenes of this is that Sidney Newman wrote on his notes, "Old man not funny enough."
Yeah.
And of course, he does eventually become. He got straight to the point, very pithy.
Yeah.
He does eventually become funny, but
Yeah.
it was a reason, quite a long journey to the giggly simpleton he becomes. Hartnell. Here he just goes from extremely acerbic to just slightly less disturbing.
The bit in the junkyard, I think, is the beginnings of the twinkle in his eye when he's deliberately ignoring Ian and Barbara and examining the painting, and you just get the hint of the Doctor that he's going to become. But yes, it's embryonic. The back wall of the TARDIS is the most exciting difference in the two versions. It's got a big painted backdrop of some valves in the pilot. It's worth the admission fee alone.
And the version of the pilot that they've stuck on the beginning box set that I saw, they've excised the most egregious bit of manual fiddling around with the doors, so you don't even get that much fun.
That's the other thing, is that the 93 version I ended up becoming very familiar with, and then when it came out on DVD, it's a different cut again.
From memory, it has an extremely complicated history. I think in 93, because of course, correct me if I'm wrong, the recording session is the first half done in one take, and then the second half, the TARDIS scene's done twice because of foul-ups. So the first time they showed it, every time they've shown the pilot, they've had to edit it together. So the first time they did A and B. The second time it was shown later in the 90s, or was it early 2000? It was A and C. And it wasn't really till we got the DVD that we got the whole lot. And it is all on there, Richard, in case you hadn't noticed. You can see all the heinous technical foul-ups. And of course we got an all-new version, which was some sort of best of.
Yeah, they took
all
different
the
cuts,
fluffs
didn't they?
removed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what I watched was the best of.
Well, exciting times.
It's interesting because it's not really a pilot, is it?
No.
Not in the traditional sense. I was talking about this with a mate this morning when I said what we were what we're going to be watching. And he said, well, it's not really a pilot, so we can refer to it as the pilot, but it was the actual, they made the episode intending to broadcast it, but just with the fallback of, if they felt like it needed redoing, they had a little bit of wiggle room to revisit.
Yeah. They did have the other type of pilot in those days. It existed, didn't they? They made pilots in the modern sense.
Yeah.
Even back then. So we need a different term for it, but we don't have one. The unbroadcast first abandoned recording session. It's not quite as snappy, is it?
Yeah. And the interesting thing is, of course, if this one had gone out, that it would have gone out on the 16th of November, and history we'd have been robbed of one of history's greatest coincidences / AIDS memoir, wouldn't we?
And again, correct me if I'm wrong, if that version had gone out, wouldn't Doctor Who have been fixed as being from the 49th century Earth rather than from much vaguer another time, another place?
Not necessarily. I don't think he says Earth. I think they say that.
Right, no, it's just... He doesn't not say Earth.
In fact, I think he very specifically says that he's alien in the pilot, and there's no reference made either way in the main.
I think I remember hearing something, because I didn't watch the pilot this time, and I did pick up on a reference to him being alien, and because I've been doing some re-listens of quite a few of the missing episode soundtracks and quite enjoying the bits where you think, okay, have they figured out that he's alien yet? I was slightly caught up by the fact that there's a reference to the Doctor and Susan being from another world or something similar. Although I suppose there's
world's woolly though, isn't it?
I suppose that's there is a.
I think is it Spearhead from Space the first time he's said he's an alien?
I don't want to be overly picky, but I mean, are we even sure that the word alien was quite as clear in its meaning? I mean, at this point, it still could mean foreign in some contexts. And I've got a feeling, I mean, towards the end of the episode, he does say to Ian to try and convince him that it really is Stone Age Earth outside. If you could stand in the dust on an alien world and see strange birds wheeling.
Yes, and he's talking
and he knows
about...
but he knows it's still Earth out there,
Yeah.
and yet he recalls it alien.
Exactly.
So I think the word can be much more loosely applied. Anyway, I think what we can conclude is they were keeping their options open and/or didn't know.
Yes. So she says, I was born in another time, another world. So
Yeah.
you're right. So it's a little bit
I think
ambiguous.
I did do a slightly contentious YouTube video on this subject, and we explored the fact that although it's fairly easy to read it as being alien, there was nothing firmly established, and therefore one of the early comic strips, the Klepton parasites, the Doctor's a human inventor who just invents a time machine in his junkyard. And then the same again happens with Peter Cushing, Doctor Who's just a human inventor. So these we now look back on as just extraordinary aberrations in the history of Doctor Who. But back at the time, people wouldn't have blinked twice at them.
I remember your video very well. It was very thorough and very well researched and very well presented. And I wish I could remember the facts. I remember enjoying it, but it was all in one ear and out the other. But didn't you sort of conclude that even within different writers within the same production era would have different takes on it, and as long as they weren't heinously contradicting each other, the script editor wouldn't bother changing it?
The two best examples are the chase followed by the time meddler, where the chase establishes that the Doctor built the TARDIS himself, and the time meddler instantly establishes that they roll off a production line and that the meddling monk's got his own. But even the meddling monk, they swerve saying that he's an alien. They say that he's from 50 years earlier, later, I can't remember. Different time period. Everything's about the time period. Like you say, I think they were hedging their bets somewhat. Because Barbara says, you look like us, you sound like us. And she says, I'm from a different time, a different world.
It's nice to hear Three Guitars Mood 2 in its proper context, having listened to it many times in the edit. I was also noticing how Ian in this is quite irritating in the way that if you were Barbara anyway, it's surprising that she's so kind of forbearing, I suppose, or maybe that was just a lot of a female teacher in 1963, but it appears that he's telling her that she doesn't know what she's talking about quite a lot of the time.
Yes, and also she's, just to skip forward, she's screaming quite a bit in the next couple of episodes, which she won't do afterwards. The characters are a bit more strongly written in ways that they'll be mellowed quite quickly, won't they? All of them.
It's nice that she drifts towards believing the Doctor And there's that interesting separation
Yes.
that
Yes.
happens there, and then it happens later in the cavemen episodes, and then happens in the Daleks as well.
I guess the implication is not that she's overly credulous or a simpleton, but that Ian is unnecessarily closed-minded because he thinks
Yes.
he's the scientific one. He thinks he knows the limits of science, which he shouldn't really if he was genuinely scientific. So really, he's not cut out to be a teacher, is he? Really? What an arrogant man.
It puzzled me today watching Barbara storms in. The whole setup scene with her and Ian is predicated on the fact that Barbara's had this absolutely horrendous day because of Susan. But there's really no context to that. Because, I mean, if it's anything like her minor disruption of Ian's class, Susan probably ended up looking foolish anyway. The whole class laughing at her. I don't quite know what Barbara's horrific day because of Susan Foreman was caused by.
No. If that makes a day horrific, then the rest of the school kids must be unusually well-mannered for in London.
Unless it's been really hard chatting away to the school secretary trying to get hold of the proper address or whatever. But yeah, I don't know.
I was watching with the production subtitles on, and so I'm not sure who did them for this, but they are owed full credit for any misses I come up with, I think. But certainly, from what I understand, certainly with regard to Ian's attitude and so on, we dodged a bullet because the earlier drafts were riddled with sexism and women driver jokes and all sorts of things. And
when they were Cliff and Lola?
no, I think later than that. I think once they...
There was the suggestion that she was a bit tipsy. When
she first tried to go, that she might have been drunk.
Right.
Yeah, she was... Because Ian was able to undermine the believability of her story that she'd followed Susan into an empty junkyard and Susan seemingly didn't have a house to live in.
He's gaslighting her. This is horrific. This is horrible for the 1965 crew, isn't it?
I was prepared to give Anthony Coburn full credit for all the things I liked about the writing, which is a lot. They're not in all 4 episodes, I'm afraid to say. But clearly, the unsung hero, as usual in this era, is David Whittaker.
Yeah.
Smoothing it all out.
Taking out Susan's throbbing. She talks about how the music she's listening to, she says it taught her to throb. And there's also the romance with Ian and Barbara goes out the window. Ian says something like, "You live alone, don't you? Well, I'll be sitting at home in my pants tonight. What about you?" And she said, me too. I'm paraphrasing, but that's the gist of it. And so there was definite romantic undertones, underpants.
As well as improving it, he's clearly trying to he's remembered that this is a family show, which Anthony Coburn might have forgotten. So there's lots of things David Whittaker knew you couldn't get away with, but this Doctor is still allowed to smoke at this point, of course. Why wouldn't he be? It's going to be decades before that would be considered a problem.
Well, Ian was as a smoker to begin with.
Yes, yeah.
And they excised that on the basis that it would interfere with the logic of not being able to make fire later because he would have cigarettes and matches on him.
The only reason. Otherwise he'd have been a 60-a-day man. And there'd have been a cigarette machine down the corridor from the food machine.
And yet they keep in the Doctor smoking because it's a plot thread that the cavemen say, "Oh, I saw him make fire, therefore we'll..." And then the Doctor says, "I can't make fire."
Ian is a smoker in the David Whittaker novel,
Yeah.
the exciting adventure with the Daleks. Also here, Susan likes to walk alone in the dark, she tells us, but it's the last time she's going to enjoy that, because by the time we get to the Daleks, she hates walking alone in the dark. Spends most of the time screaming.
Yep, she pretty much hates everything fairly quickly, doesn't she? All these amazing planets and civilizations and other universes they've been to, she must have had an extremely quiet, sheltered time with it.
Well, she is very, very keen on staying in 1963, isn't she? Presumably it's the most civilised place they've been, and so she feels like, yes, somewhere boring at last. Let's stay here.
I must say, I like the point of view shots you get of Susan in those flashback scenes. That's quite a nice bit of work that, again, we're not going to see too much more of in the series thereafter. In that first series, anyway.
It's because we don't get Ian and Barbara in the scene. That's the point.
Yes.
It's actually, we get Ian and Barbara's, we get their POV so they can stay sitting in the car and...
Yeah. So it's a brilliant piece of logistics, but it's also really rather neat from an artistic point of view as well. So it's best of both worlds, eh?
Yeah.
There aren't many point of view shots in Doctor Who, but there's another one in the TV movie.
Good point. Yeah.
One of 1,000 points of comparison that I've made for later on.
Interestingly enough, we had some Doctor Interior monologue just on Sunday night, which pulled me up short and made me think, okay, you don't often get that.
No.
True.
You're still not allowed to do it if you're writing Doctor Who prose fiction.
Yeah, well, you know.
But it's one rule
It's
for the
one rule for
showrunner,
them, isn't
another
it?
rule for the rest of us.
Yeah. So, science people, what about this business about active chemicals and it sounds like absolute rubbish to me. I presume it's absolute rubbish.
It sounds like absolute rubbish to me. I'm an astrophysicist, damn it, Jim, not a chemist.
Very good.
No, I can't. I was more interested in trying to work out when Susan's banging on about the fifth dimension being space.
Oh, yeah.
Like, after she's, only in our current understanding of the XYZ dimensions, or ABC in Ian's demonstration, are the space dimensions.
You would have thought,
height,
yes.
width and depth. So I don't know. It's interesting. But then, so is it some kind of hyperspace? Is it?
Ooh.
Is it?
And beyond that, space-time is a single thing, right?
Yes.
But am I right in thinking that Einstein posited that? So that should already have been well known by the time they were writing this.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And also, I mean, even as a child, I remember thinking dimensions 1, 2, and 3, as you say, up, down, whatever, X, Y, and Z. And if time is the fourth, then I always thought it was a bit weird that space was the fifth. It seemed like a step backwards to me.
Yeah.
And I've not changed in that opinion. It seems a bit clumsy. It's supposed to sound mysterious, isn't it?
Well, it can sound
space
mysterious.
is even more weird than time.
Yeah, we had some of that on Sunday as well. I couldn't quite make sense of it. But
Oh, God.
you can look forward to that, Paul. But without bringing that in, curiously enough, with my Dr. Science hat on, one of the cool things is, I guess, the sort of space thing these days, we could wave it away and say, well, it is kind of this brain space with BRANE, nothing to do with Irani. And there's this theory that, because there's these various theories of everything, that the universe has either 10 or 26 dimensions, or 11 or 26 dimensions.
I've heard.
And that most of these are bundled up and very, very small, so they all kind of fold in on each other, and you just don't see them because of the scale we're at. But there is this, the idea that there might be one additional dimension that is actually quite big, and it separates planes of space-time from each other, and means you can have like parallel universes and things like that, and that could be your actual hyperspace / additional space dimension.
Indeed, I mean, if this fifth dimension, if it said sideways or something like that, I would have understood where they were coming from, because in the original format for the programme, that was the idea, wasn't it? It would be a historical, a backwards, a forwards in time, and then a sideways for the weird ones.
Yeah.
Not literally sideways, but they had this idea that there was a dimension of weirdness,
like the
which you might
gunfighters.
go into occasionally.
Well, and of course, this was they obviously the plan was originally they were going to do the minuscules as the first
The minuscules.
as the first story.
We
weren't they?
desperately
Which
need a
was-
story
yeah.
about the TARDIS team being reduced to 1 inch in height.
Yes, which seems
I
a
remember
very
there's
odd.
that's a memo that is sent around
and,
towards
and,
the end of the first series.
and we know it didn't come off, but it seems a very odd way of your opening pitch on your story about someone with a space-time machine is to say, oh, it's gone wrong and we're in the present day, but we're reduced to running around in a planet of giant, Land of the Giants pre-make. I don't know. Had Land of the Giants happened by then?
We get into the TARDIS, or we get into the junkyard, I suppose. I mean, you've already talked about how the Doctor he's sort of hoping they're just going to walk away. I feel like if he was slightly less suspicious than they might do, they do start to talk about going off and getting a police officer, and then it's sort of his slight of streperousness, which means that they don't actually go and do that immediately, and allow Susan to shout out. But I guess once they're in, there's this sort of slightly contrived, I suppose, business that the Doctor's convinced that even if they just disappear off and go and consort with cavemen and Daleks and so on, somehow it's going to be terrible if someone back on Earth knows that they ever existed.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's nice that they all go off together because we have some lovely adventures, but it just seems a little bit inconsistent.
You pointed out the fundamental flaw underlying. Yeah, there you go. Scrap it.
Nuts.
Yeah, 58 years. 58 years. It was nice while it lasted.
At the risk of throwing forward too early, that is a stark contrast to the TV movie, where the Doctor is just waltzing through, tossing out pieces of advice as to how best to change people's future. Don't forget to do this next week. Answer this question in your exam. Don't come to San Francisco for your holiday next year. Yeah, he just doesn't care by then, does he? But yes, at this point. Imagine if two school teachers went to the police and said, "There's a police box in a junkyard. Think of the repercussions."
Yeah. And, I mean, I suppose the other thing that comes over to me immediately is that, considering this is the first episode, it's not as embarrassing as you might imagine for a story shot 58 years ago, and a lot of both the direction and the sets and the setup and even the acting is, I mean, okay, it's of its era, but it's pretty good of its era. It could have been a lot worse.
I think we're underselling it there. I think it's bloody marvellous.
Yeah.
I mean, this first episode, I won't include 2, 3 and 4 for the benefit of all those strange people that don't like them. But I mean, it sets a standard that the programme will not always live up to. And possibly not even the majority of the time. So it's a good job this team was working on this first story rather than another fantasy team of writer and director that I could invent.
Yeah, it's interesting directorially, the stuff in. I was thinking, okay, it's quite, and you get the fact it's a comp is very progressive for the time, because comps were only really just coming in. Comprehensive. That Susan's Coal Hill is a comprehensive rather than a secondary modern. So
that doesn't mean anything to me.
Oh right, okay. Well, basically the comprehensive school idea being. You educate.
We used to have a class system in this country, Gavin, before the utopia that you were born into.
Yeah.
Well, I went to a grammar school. I mean, if that's not
there you go.
the lingering class system, I don't know what is. But,
yeah. Well, secondary modern was the other place.
Okay.
But
well, that's why I was not exposed to it.
And
There's a big fence around it.
comprehensives was the idea that you'd educate everyone together to the best of, regardless of their ability, to do as best you could, really. And it's 2 seconds into Doctor Who, and it's the woke agenda. Yeah. barely has that pillar of the establishment, the policeman, disappeared off the screen. Then we're in some comp.
Well, exactly, and it looks very modern. It is a modern school in terms of the architecture, and ironically, I'm going to mention a story which we're not down to discuss tonight. When they revisit ostensibly the same school in Remembrance of the Daleks, they actually make it look Victorian, because by now 1963 is a period piece, so they can't believe, so they assume it would look extremely old. But they were wrong.
That's continued, isn't it, in the new series? Clara's version of the school is a Victorian building, I think.
Yeah.
If it's not 3 different buildings, but yeah.
Yeah.
But in general, that whole, the directorially, I think the first episode, maybe it notices in the first episode because it's not quite what you expect with the TARDIS scenes and things like that, but it does feel quite kitchen sink. You get all these very, very tight shots of people emoting at each other and arguing quite. It's not really what it catches you slightly off guard. It caught me slightly off guard anyway.
Well, I think moving on as well, I think this is what surprised me a little, is that when you get the TARDIS crew reunited in the Cave of Skulls, I suppose we're probably actually into about episode 3, are we, when that happens? But there's quite a long discussion that they have in there that again is of that kind of kitchen sink variety. They're talking a lot about their relationship together. The Doctor starts to admit that maybe he wasn't right all the way along, and so on. And I mean, it is quite stagey, I guess, those latter episodes, and there are very long scenes. But again, I mean, considering that it could have been really, really bad, I think they make a lot of those sets. The forest, for instance, is an awful lot better than the forest in the Daleks. I mean, maybe because actually, they're able to make quite a big forest because it's a large part of that particular episode, whereas the forest in the Daleks is just a few fronds that Susan runs past for half a minute. But you get a sense that there's some reality to that.
But the forest in the Daleks is not supposed to have any foliage. It's all dead trees, so you can't flesh it out very well if you've got no leaves or grasses or anything like that.
The writing and the direction in 100,000 BC, The Tribe of Gum, whatever, is all perfectly pitched to the realities of television production, and specifically on this budget. It's a small cast, very contained story. It's built around claustrophobia and character, rather than wide epic vistas and action.
Yeah.
And as I say, the writing is on point, and the direction. Well, he chooses exactly the right bits to do on film.
Yeah.
Which is always a treat when it's done well in these early years. It's one of the things that gives me hope for Marco Polo if we should ever see it again. Although I don't know if anyone's looked into how much of it's on film. Maybe it's not quite as much as episodes 2, 3, and 4. But I don't remember any really jarring moments when we switch from film to videotape. It's really carefully thought through. But you've got small sets, but because the emphasis is on character, you can zoom the camera in. You just establish where you are, and then you get in nice and close, and it all becomes, and the drama is amplified, the tension's amplified, and the actors do their close-up acting business. They start gripping their lapels and doing all the things that you need to do when you're on a small screen and the viewers are only 4 feet away.
It's weird when Carl's doing it, isn't it? But Hartnell insisted.
He's the man of the future, Cal.
Yeah. But I do actually believe in these cave characters. I mean, I sort of came to it, from 40 years ago, thinking that it was just a lot of grunting and nothing very much. But I think they are credible characters. You can sort of understand where they're coming from and how they're motivated. And I guess the female characters in particular have are believable and have motives that you fully understand.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a relatively simple story, but it does seem to have a kernel of believability about it.
I think it's undeniable that they're very clear, well-motivated characters, whether you like the story or not.
Yeah.
It's very fashionable to scoff at it. The idea that your first story of this program that you have such high hopes for should be something as underwhelming and potentially pathetically ludicrous as Cavemen. And I can see that point of view, but on the other hand, it's something simple and undemanding and doesn't draw the focus too far away from our leads while we're still getting to know them. I don't know. Maybe I'm making too many excuses for it. But I mean, if we'd launch into a historical with really vivid characters, like a celebrity historical something, then the new guest characters might have drawn attention away from our leads who we don't know yet. Yeah. Or again, a really exciting science fiction story with bold new concepts. That's a lot to think about while we're still trying to get our head around. So I think it's good that it's a relatively simple, contained.
I disagree. I think they do exactly the same thing in the Daleks, but in the future and more interesting. Because they get locked up in a cell in the Daleks, they get locked up in a cell in the Cavemen, and it's exactly the same conceit. So you just get to know the main character. There's longer and more interesting scenes in the Daleks where the cast are all locked up trying to work out what to do, and I don't think it would have been any detriment to the show whatsoever if the Daleks had been the first serial.
But it was clearly no detriment to the show to start with this either, so it doesn't necessarily count as the criticism of the Tribe of Gum. But
no,
that's the only thing I'm trying to say. People have talked about this disastrous decision to put this here at this pivotal moment in the show's history as if it actually did some harm, but there's no evidence that it did.
No, but I think the Daleks rescued it from people's perceptions, because I think the reception was pretty lukewarm to the Cavemen, and then it took off with the subsequent episodes, and then
of course
Marco
it took
Polo.
off with the Daleks because that's something quite extraordinary, which is still part of popular culture 60 years later. So yeah, of course the Daleks was better. I mean, what I would also compare it with is not necessarily the Daleks, the story that came immediately after, or maybe even Marco Polo, but I think there are many stories in the next few years which are worse than this on different levels. I don't know why it gets quite as much hate as it does.
It's funny because my perception is that the fashionable opinion is to talk about how underrated it is.
Really?
Yeah, my perception is that you get lambasted if you dare to suggest that the old
Well, we all move in different circles.
truth is... Well, I mean, my perception is that everyone says it's not fair to say episodes 2, 3 and 4 are no good, because they're
Introduce
actually
me to these people. I'd like to meet them.
Jim Sangster's one. Go and speak to him.
Will do. Jim Sangster.
Giles, do you have a horse in this particular race?
Well, only with regard to the general popularity, unfortunately, this is something I can't quite remember the details of, but I know on the production notes they give some example of audience feedback. I think from Kids Junior Points of View was doing a survey very shortly after, or while this was airing, and kids were already saying it was like their second favourite TV programme. I can't remember what the first one was.
After Z-Cars, wasn't it?
After Z-Cars, exactly. Yeah, thank you.
Z-Cars was top, and Doctor Who was second.
Which is another interesting one that, nothing that was exactly aimed at kids in quite the way that you might think. So, and it was doing something right for its target audience, I think, right from the outset, and the weirdness. What I found myself thinking, I kind of went into the other 3 episodes expecting to look for the analogy, which is, funnily enough, it's foreshadowed in episode 1 because that's pretty much the only place it really comes up, that Hartnell makes the comment about the Red Indian Singer Steam Train analogy, and I was kind of waiting to see, let's have lots of analogies between Ian and Barbara versus the Doctor and Susan, compared to the whole lot of them versus the cavemen, kind of that sort of still in the nursery thing. And I didn't really find all that much of that to sort of appreciate. Maybe I was just overlooking it. Maybe I'm just being naive in that. But what I found does work about those 3 episodes, it is a quite extreme story in a way, in that it takes them so completely out of their comfort zone. It's not really okay. The characters are motivated, but you're kind of the cavemen's dialogue. You literally are seeing their thought processes and trying to get some, which is quite interesting. In terms of, I have failed to do any research onto exactly what people's theories were about this kind of period. And apparently, Verity Lambert liked to call this story the Paleolithic Age, was her shorthand for it. But, there was clearly ideas that this was around the time when there's the dawn of human consciousness as such, and that was starting to develop. And it's interesting that you get these kind of thought processes are telegraphed, but I think it's interesting that you don't really have... they really, really have to struggle to reason with the cavemen in these things, and it's quite an extreme situation. You don't have space gadgets, you don't have reasonably sophisticated historical people that you can have a moderately normal conversation with, as they come on to having with Marco Polo. And I found it quite, I find it very effective that it's a very threatening environment to be in. It's an out of control sort of, you're sort of effectively stuck on a planet with more or less wild animals.
It's showing you an alien environment in that very general sense of the word again, isn't it?
Yeah.
As you say, it's like there's not a middle ground between sci-fi and historical, but it is in the sense that it's not really either. I find it.
Yeah, well, it's the only prehistorical, isn't it?
From a dramatic point of view, it's more like sci-fi than historical, because these might as well be aliens because they have alien thought processes, as you said. It's more like, for example, to choose another one of my favourite stories, the Web Planet. It's more like the strange allegorical speech of the Opera. It's not always great television, but it's kind of it's like pure sci-fi, that kind of approach.
Is there any definite proof that it is set on Earth?
Ooh.
Just
to throw that out there. I mean, aliens historically...
Would you suddenly love it if we could prove that it wasn't? And there was
I'd have. Well, yeah. No, I wouldn't.
Maybe they're all from a dimension of fiction, and they're characters from Doctor Who Discovers Prehistoric Man, published in 1977. Or or they're robots from the Ghana's World Exhibition.
I understand that there's a lot of laudable stuff, and dramatically it has its interesting moments, but I find the setup for me can't sustain an hour of television because it's just a cyclical, it's a very small debate. I find it very tiresome. Can you make fire? No. Make fire? No. Can you make fire? No. Repeat. I can't tell them apart. Those two guys with long hair and beards, they look the same to me. So I've struggled since I was a child to work out which is Cal and which is Tsar.
Only one's got a beard.
Well, it's
really.
It's funny you should say that because I thought they looked quite different, and then at the start of one of the episodes, I was completely confused as to which one I was looking at. So
which one's Tsar? Is that Derek Newark? Is that
exactly? It's impossible to say. You agree with me?
It's like Ant and Dec, isn't it? They look quite different, but you still don't know which one's which.
Cal is always standing on the left.
No, they don't have beards, do they? That's incredible. Does one have a beard? If
one
one has a beard,
yeah.
I should have written that down because that would have been really useful.
One has a beard.
They should have different coloured jerkins on.
Yeah, that would really help. Yeah.
In black and white.
Good Lord.
Brilliant.
I like Derek Newark's performance. I think it's. I think it's more believably human than his performance in Inferno as Greg Seven.
Oh yeah,
that's my hot take.
Yeah.
I find it frustrating trying to work out the intelligence level of these people. We're told that they don't understand kindness and they don't understand friendship, and yet
yes,
they have a huge vocabulary and they seemingly understand all the conversation all of the time and interrupt people. And yet there's certain specific words that they don't understand. And then when Barbara's trying to explain things, she speaks really slowly and they just kind of look and shake their heads and grunt. It's like the TARDIS translation circuits are dropping in and out all the time. And I just find it deeply frustrating trying to get a handle on what the rules are in these.
I think it gets away with it. But obviously no one involved was a linguistic expert. I mean, presumably they had a much smaller vocabulary, but does that mean that even with the TARDIS translating for them, they would still be gaps? I don't know.
Well, suppose
but I don't get on with the idea that they don't know what a friend is. I mean,
no, because of course they also clearly grouped into tribes, because that's why they don't.
They're not
all
hate
family.
Each other.
They're not family tribes. There is
None
an
of them are
extended
friends.
family where they've chosen to work to live together for mutual benefit.
All cousins.
So they should understand the idea of collaboration and cooperation. So it doesn't quite work.
It's not at all that modern to know how, for instance, sophisticated the Neanderthals were. And it's been said that you could take a Neanderthal, raise him in modern society, and it would function well. So the idea that this group of people is sort of subhuman, like half Yeti, I don't know what they're...
With their brains, I'm not a doctor of science, but their brains are the same size as ours, are they not, at this point? I mean, when is this set? Who are these people? Where would they be?
It's unclear.
Well, the Caucasian gene is a mutation of about 30,000 years old, so it can't be older than that if you're going by the ethnicity of the actors. But if you're treating it as a historical whitewash, then you open to all.
But does the fact that they are living in caves narrow it down? Because they clearly... Does that mean they've left Africa and left the Middle East? Does that mean they're European? Or
well, it feels like
tell us. Don't tell us that they're... Don't tell us that they're caving up, these actors. Don't tell us that this pro is going to get cancelled because it turns out that these actors shouldn't be playing those parts.
It's supposed to be an ice age, isn't it?
Yes,
because
I was going to say. They're referring to the Ice Age, aren't they?
Yeah, well, you assume so, yeah.
Coburn said he felt it was set in 180,000 or 190,000 BC, so it's closer to 200,000 BC in Coburn's head, I think.
Paul Googles when was the last Ice Age on Earth. It began about 100,000 years ago and lasted until 25,000 years ago. Could that be where they got the old 100,000 BC from, perhaps? A very loose understanding of when the last Ice Age was.
But the problem is, if you put it at 20,000 years when they're after the last Ice Age and they're all Caucasian, then they're basically on the verge of building cities.
Yeah.
Yeah,
when do we start settling down and farming? That's about 10,000 years ago, isn't it?
That's about 10,000.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's still in the
That's in the Fertile
Little bit.
Crescent.
The-
Well, and
yes,
probably also
the
in China.
Thingamee Basin.
Yeah.
But this could be one isolated, very stupid tribe just living out.
Or they could be
In-
on another planet.
Oh,
Or
yeah.
they could be future humans who, on an Earth colony, who've lost their technology and devolved.
Hey, is this Mondas? Emotions, love, pride, hate,
Oh my
fear.
God.
Have you no emotions, sir?
Still not too late
There
for
is the skull, so I think you could probably identify that if you were a zoologist. There's a wombat skull or something like that, or a horse, or a camel.
Could be a horse, says Ian, very
Could be a
vague.
horse.
Yeah.
But isn't there a peccary that's killed by the jaguar?
A what?
Isn't there a peccary or something? It's a bit of a warthog or something
Okay.
that's been
It's a
Well,
warthog.
killed by.
they have
killed
warthogs
by
in
the jaguar.
space.
Warthogs in space
Have you-
that's your next big finish, isn't it?
You've seen the rescue.
This brings me on to my whole thing about 2001: A Space Odyssey. If we're talking about
Go on then.
the dawn of man thing,
Oh yes.
I am fascinated by the fact that basically Africa was, there they are, and it's just all 8 men and tapirs, and that's and I'm just thinking, was the monolith basically waiting for the dawn of tapir intelligence was about to So I think there's an
So they had
interesting.
3 options. It was apes, tapirs, or Silurians,
Yes.
and they were going to go in one direction.
Well,
So
Don't bring one direction into this.
yeah. So old mother is the fire exeter in this particular story. I mean, as far as she's concerned, the whole fire thing's been a terrible mistake.
yeah.
You know, and she's had to live
Yeah.
through the last 40 years of people burning stuff, and she just isn't at all happy with it. And she thinks everything would be so much better if we just went back to how things were
Yeah.
during the
So
Great
just
Famine.
To not
just want more
burning
skins.
stuff. Yeah.
She's a trouble starter.
Yeah.
And yet, she wouldn't
Toughen
survive
them-
if she had to
toughen
eat
them
raw
up.
meat
Toughen-
without she hasn't got
toughen
any
up the
teeth.
Yeah. I reckon she should have arranged for a referendum. It would all have been fine.
I was going to say, whether you like this or not, at least it's only 3 episodes, which makes it fairly unusual in this era. But there's no point me saying that now because Gavin has already said that at 3 episodes it's far too long.
Yeah, because the most frustrating thing today was I was thinking, this doesn't drag quite as badly as I remember it. Here they are. They're back to the TARDIS.
Oh no, they're going to have another
They've
episode.
been intercepted and recaptured. There's another damn episode. Of
I
this, so
mean,
we're
they
back to
tried
the
very.
cave.
They had to try really hard to get captured, didn't they? I mean, they made an awful lot of noise.
If they hadn't jogged on the spot and been hit in the face with branches, they'd have been much faster back to the TARDIS.
Oh well. Also, William Russell. I mean, you've got to say he's a very consistent actor. He's utterly incapable of doing any stumbling acting in anything he ever does. It's just as well that he doesn't have to do any dancing, I think.
No, that's true.
Well, until the chase.
Yes. Good Lord. Well, You just wait till we get onto the chase.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think what evidence there is that this is another planet. I mean, the Doctor hasn't got his readings yet.
That's true. It's the year 0, so we don't know what year it is. Helpfully.
The yearometer.
The Eurometer. Never
The
get that again.
Eurometer is mentioned.
Well, we get that back in the TV movie. Yeah, there we go.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Another nice link.
The air is superb, and there's no radiation.
So what would have been ideal
Narrows
to
it
make
down.
this story a bit more interesting is if just like there'd been some kind of exciting futuristic periscope that had just like popped up in the background of the cave and looked around and then just gone back down again and the story carried on as normal. I'd have accepted that.
Yeah, could be like the twist at the end of Planet of the Apes, but in reverse. You think it's not. You think it is Earth, but it isn't.
Yes.
And then, or like yes, and then we have another 3 episodes where the robots come out. Maybe all the skulls are robotic.
The periscope robots. Oh, that was one thing that I did find interesting. In episode 2, I'm pretty sure they're all real human skulls. And then episode 3 onwards, they're plaster casts.
Oh right. Oh, I see.
Because all of the anatomy goes very strange.
I thought they looked the one that there's the close up that they favour at the beginning of episode 3 is very strange. It's got a much bigger hole split in the head, so they've made that more obvious.
Well, there's one in the background in episode 3 that looks like a Halloween decoration. His skeleton is just not human. There you go. It's not a human skeleton in the background in episode 3. It's clearly not human anatomy. But in episode 2, that is definitely some poor bloke
sequel
from
ideas.
the Victorian cabinet. Weird, yeah. It made me wonder, in my macabre mind, who that was. There's a skull. There's definitely a human skull, but I'm pretty sure a proper human anatomical skeleton on the right of frame, lying horizontally as episode 2 cave shot opens.
Right.
I'd be pretty confident that was once a real person. And why hasn't Toby Haydock found out who that is?
I saw Chris Chapman at the weekend. I should have pitched that to him as a documentary, looking for the odour of this skeleton.
Yeah. Looking for Callan's ancestors. Yeah.
On the subject of the intelligibility or whatever, apparently Coburn wanted to do a draft with. I don't think it ever got to a draft, but apparently he at least toyed with the idea and wanted to have the cavemen only communicating grunts. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, there's still a bit too much grunting as it is. So
God knows how that would have come off.
like a very avant-garde piece of modern theatre.
Yes, yeah.
Does he have a background in that sort of thing? Or is he just an idiot?
As you were saying, thank goodness for David Whittaker.
Yes. And apparently he slowed down the bonding between the team, as it were, in the stuff we were talking about in the Cave of Skulls and so on. He sort of they sort of came together as a team much more rapidly, and he sort of deliberately wound it back so that they could.
It comes and goes as it is now, doesn't it?
Yes,
the Doctor apologises, but only in episode 2. I'm desperately sorry. I'm so sorry. But then he immediately reneges on that and thinks they're a bunch of idiots.
His characterisation drifts back towards the pilot, I think, as particularly in episode 3.
Well, we get the business with the
I know he's
rock,
yeah, but even just conversationally, and I know they're in dire straits and everything, but it's all that hard-edged version. I don't know why he isn't cracking jokes about cracking skulls.
But we don't know for sure how much of this slow softening of the character was deliberate, do we? I mean, even after all these years, it's with the fans have retroactively fitted the Doctor with a character arc where he gets, where he learns from these human companions what are traits of compassion and nobility and so on, rather than just going around the universe being a bastard, which is apparently his previous MO. But is this just something the production team themselves discovered over these first few stories?
Well, I think definitely there's a contrast between the pilot and the broadcast version of the first episode, and I think Hartnell or the director or the nature of the script means that none of that warmth is present that was injected into the broadcast version. I guess it's a situational thing. There's not a lot you can do with life and death situations. To have Hartnell tittering away. No.
At this point, he's pipe smoker of the year and whacking people with massive flints every time your back's turned.
Well, whacking people over the head with stuff doesn't exactly go away, does it?
Yeah, but he's...
He said he's a liar. He said he was going to get him to draw a map with the rock.
I mean, he's also quite cunning with the whole knife thing. I mean, and it's a nice bit of politics as well that they've got in with her and Tsar, and so it feels like they're on side with the cave people, and then they come back and there's been a revolution, and unfortunately it's Cal who's in charge. So all that niceness, he's the other one. All that niceness has been a waste of time.
I'd never spotted before that the female, the only eligible female is called her, because it makes the dialogue quite confusing at points. When when Tsar's talking to her dad, and he says, "I don't want any of the women, I want her." You think, who's she? The cat's mother?
The old mother was originally meant to be the mother, wasn't she? And then she's redrafted into becoming the matriarch of the tribe, generically speaking.
Oh, was she?
But whichever one it is, Cal or Tsar, I don't know. She's the mother of that one, originally.
Well, Tsar is the one who's part of the tribe, and Cal is the one who's wandered in from elsewhere.
Yes. Well, her is none too keen on her dad. Or she kind of turns on the sixpence. And,
no, sorry.
and goes from...
She is none too thin.
yeah,
Giles, I expected better of you.
mere words, man, and everything. Yeah.
Any more thoughts on this before we wind things up?
Very minor thing, but
10 out of 10.
it's a nice
Would
touch
watch
with
again.
the Geiger, having the Geiger counter smashed when the Doctor is taken is a nice little thing. But,
Are you saying that because if it hadn't been smashed, the Daleks wouldn't have been as filled with jeopardy because he'd have detected the problem outside the
he
ship?
might have taken his radiation. Yes. Oh, well, I don't know.
Yes, that's what you're saying. David Whittaker is on the ball, thinking ahead,
Yes.
playing his game of three-dimensional intergalactic chess.
If
or
they've
whatever.
got a portable radiation detector, it does rather beg the question.
Yes.
Well, it strikes me
The
as the
Daleks
same.
is one episode long.
Yes. Red could
Although-
turn blue all by itself and they could go home.
Although, let's face it, it's already high at the end of episode 4.
This is true. They just went back and checked the bloody thing.
and they wander off. They wander off to get changed into new clothes, and they can't bother to check it before they go out again. It's their own fault, really, isn't it? It's pretty slapdash. Should we take a couple of minutes and then we can come back and have a chat about the TV movie?
Policeman's different.
Yeah, apparently, but he's wearing a helmet, so who would notice?
Good
Oh,
point.
between...
He hasn't got a beard, has he?
Yeah. No. There's no way of knowing.
You put them side by side, you could tell they were different, but you still wouldn't know which one's which. Hi, Emily. Are you okay?
Yeah. Have you seen my marbles, Richard?
You what?
My marbles.
Oh, I thought you had them earlier on.
Yes, I did, but I'm not quite sure what I've done with them since then. So hello and welcome back to episode 3 of If It's Hurting, It's Not Working.
Yeah, it's the third instalment of our podcast all about work. Why we work, how we work, and what makes a great job.
So subjects for this episode, we're going to be covering mental health, primarily around the impact of the pandemic on our working lives.
We had this game of musical chairs we were playing where we moved between jobs and careers and everything was relatively easy, and then suddenly the music stopped with the pandemic, and if you were in the wrong place and your industry shut down or was really severely impacted, then that was bad news for you.
It's been a crazy time, but we've all managed to stumble through it somehow.
Throughout my life, it was a thing that nobody spoke about, particularly at work, but hardly talked about anyway. And it's such a hidden thing. I mean, nobody can see that you're unwell. Nobody can see that you're struggling or that you're hurting.
Well, you know me quite well, Richard, and you know that I'm one of those that can hide it pretty well. But, I'm behind the camera and only on the mic at the moment, so it's a bit easier to talk about. I think it's because that stigma's gone of actually, it's all right. That old saying, it's okay to not be okay.
Yep.
But actually, that's true, but it's not okay to be not okay for a very long period of time. So hello and welcome back to episode 3 of If It's Not... Oh, why am I doing this to myself? If it's hurting, it's not working. Okay.
What am I doing? Oh yeah, opening Twitter. Opening Twitter for the old comedy sketch.
You sound
Yeah.
so
The
convinced.
comedy sketch.
The old funny stuff.
Gav,
Hi.
I believe these two are known to you.
Sorry, hang on, I haven't got my sketch.
Give Devon some context. I think he needs it.
You've heard of An Unearthly Child?
Vaguely.
Yeah. This is
Sorry, my voice is still recovering.
Who's
Right.
playing Susan? We made up the name TARDIS for the initials, time and relative dimension
Don't we?
in space.
We flip roles though, don't we? Because my
little
They
my
couldn't
first
understand
line's
when you saw the
Susan.
different dimensions
Yeah.
inside from those outside.
Yeah,
I've got a Susan.
there is a little bit of that.
I get to be Ian throughout.
Gav,
But that's fantastic. Oh, sorry.
It's true. Every word of it's true. You don't know what you've done coming in here.
I've got it. I just got that joke. That's
Yeah.
quite clever. Talked all around instead of walked all around. Yep,
Oh
got
yes,
it. Very
I
good.
hadn't
Well
got
done.
that. Very good. Very good.
You put some effort in this week.
A laugh, double laugh in there.